Walt Three Blind Weiss has to be one of the best nicknames in baseball history. Although, if we're being honest, most people outside of Northern California and many of those who grew up there and live there probably won't be familiar with it. In many ways, that's sort of the embodiment of Weiss as a baseball player in general. If you didn't know he existed, you probably wouldn't care, but he did manage to give hope and a little bit of joy to those of us who happen to follow his career. If you looked at Weiss's stats, you'd think he'd sucked. He never hit more than 8 home runs or 48 RBIs in a season and was a career .258 hitter. This wouldn't be so bad if Weiss didn't play a majority of his career during the steroid era when guys like Terry Steinbeck were slamming 30 dingers in a season. Oh, and worse yet, Weiss happened to play for the Colorado Rockies in the mid-90s. This was peak Coors Field where broken bat bloopers were finding their way into becoming home runs. You might think Weiss was a defensive whiz like Omar Vizquel, who just was a slick fielder even though he didn't do jack squat with the bat. Not the case though. He never won a Gold Glove and was by all metrics a pretty average fielder. And yet, much like the Walt Three Blind Weiss nickname, if you watched Weiss play and you sort of saw him with the A's or with Colorado or Atlanta later on in his career, he would grow on you as a player. If you were a little leaguer in the early to mid 90s and you happened to see Weiss on a baseball field, I think it gave you hope that, well, if that dude can make it, I can make it. Anyone can make it if he can be a professional baseball player. When Weiss burst onto the scene with the Oakland Athletics in the late 1980s, the team was a powerhouse. Jose Canseco won American League Rookie of the Year in 1986 with Mark McGwire following suit in 87. Of course, the Bash brothers are only just a small part of what was a very deep and talented lineup and pitching staff. You had guys like Ricky Henderson and Dave Henderson in the lineup. There was Terry Steinbeck, who I just mentioned earlier. And then, pitching side, you had Bob Welch and Storm Davis. This was a really good pitching rotation. Games being shut out by the incomparable Dennis Eckersley, who obviously won the Cy Young around this time and was just one of the most, if not the most dominant reliever in baseball. And of course, the A's would reach the World Series in 88, 89, and 1990, although their 1-2 record is not much to write home about in those fall classics. The A's obviously had all of this high-level talent, a lot of young talent, but Walt Three Blind Weiss was there as well. In fact, he would be the 3rd consecutive Athletics player to win Rookie of the Year, taking home the honor in 1988 after Canseco and McGwire. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, he won Rookie of the Year, or American League Rookie of the Year. He must be good, right? That's proof that he's a talented ball player. Not so much. The 1988 American League Rookie of the Year candidates are all just their ass. Like, it was not a deep or competitive. I mean, they probably shouldn't have given out the award in 88. Seriously, just look at this. Unless you are Jody Reed's mom or a diehard fan of mediocre closers, there is no one worth winning the award. The only reason Weiss won Rookie of the Year is because they had to give it out to someone. Someone had to be Rookie of the Year, and it just happened Weiss was the least worst of a terrible field. But hey, if Weiss can do it, I could do it. Anyone could do it, right? The greatest single play of Walt Weiss's career, without question, is when Ricky Henderson collected hit number 2000. Now, it probably sounds a little bit confusing, so let's just go to the tape and see what I'm talking about.
Inside fastball missed away, and Ricky has a base hit.
This is going to be close. It's going to be close.
Throws well.
He can throw.
Drops the ball. Weiss never touched the plate, I don't believe. Yes, he did, apparently.
Yeah, evidently he did.
This is awesome on so many levels, but let's start with the obvious. You have Ricky Henderson. Ricky Henderson, a player who loved attention, who loved himself, And somehow, on this historic moment, he got upstaged by the unassuming Walt Weiss, who pulls off a pretty amazing play at home. He manages to bowl over the catcher and tag home on this like Superman-esque dive. It's really incredible. It's probably the most athletic play Weiss ever makes. It's probably the most notable play Weiss will ever have in his career. It's ridiculous. Look at Henderson, by the way. He is pissed off. Like, he's just there clapping, but you can see it. He is not happy about what has just transpired. Even the A's dugout looks confused at the feat of athleticism Weiss just managed to display. Best of all in all, this has to be Weiss's awkward running motion. It's all like arms and hips. It just looks so janky and awkward. It's the direct opposite of Rickey Henderson's smooth, sleek strides. Finally, how can you not love Weiss rocking the hat under helmet look? It's like straight out of your local 1990s Little League game. In 1998, Walt Weiss made his first and only appearance in the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. He was playing for the Atlanta Braves at this time in the National League. And I know what some of you are thinking, dude made the All-Star Game. That's proof, like he's got to be good, right? Not so fast. Weiss was in his first season with Atlanta and was a 34-year-old middle infielder. He was playing regularly, but he was also splitting duties with Ozzie Guillen at this time. Statistically, there's absolutely no case to be made for Weiss being an all-star. Like, he wasn't even close to being in the upper echelon of shortstops in the National League this season. Of course, MLB all-star starters are voted on by fans who don't really care about on-field performance in most cases. Earlier that year, Weiss's 3-year-old son was infected with E. coli during a trip to an Atlanta area water park. It was a pretty serious situation. The kid needed some medical attention. His kidneys were shut down. It was a pretty big ordeal overall. That led to a wave of sympathy voting to make Weiss an all-star. People stuffed ballot boxes because that's what we did back then, is you had paper ballots at the ballpark and you'd have to fill in your Scantron and then you'd put it in. And people filled in the Scantron for Weiss like gangbusters because despite having what was one of his worst statistical seasons as a pro, he made the all-star team in the National League. The Walt 3 Blind Weiss nickname, when I think about it, it's campy as hell. Like, it's stupid. Like, let's be honest, it's dumb. Even growing up in that time frame, I don't think any of us really knew how or why it came to be, but it was a thing. And that's pretty much like Weiss as a baseball player himself. Like, you don't know why he was there or how he got there, but there he was playing shortstop in the major leagues, and good on him for it. As I mentioned a few times earlier in this video, when you watched Walt Weiss as a little leaguer, as a kid who maybe not have been the most talented, who wasn't playing all-stars or whatever, it gave you hope you could still make it, right? Like, if Walt Weiss hitting 250, no pop, no speed, average fielding, like if this guy was in the major league, basically anyone on a little league team in America, they had a slimmer of hope that they could make it. Now, of course, we know Weiss was uber talented when compared to Joe Schmo. Like, to make it to that level, you need a lot of talent, but I think it gave a lot of kids in that era just a chance of someone to look up to as saying, they're not the most talented. They're not the best. But hey, you didn't need to be Mark McGwire crushing home runs. You didn't need to be Ken Griffey Jr. You didn't need to have these elite talents. If you worked hard and you stuck with it, maybe, just maybe, you would find yourself going up against Jody Reed for an American League award one day. So yeah, at the end of the day, Walt 3 Blind Weiss, great nickname, pretty average player, but an inspiration to little leaguers during the 90s regardless. That does it for me. I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it up to the 25.